The air in the courtroom felt thick, like a blanket of dust and old lies. I sat there, trying to breathe normally, my hands clammy. Across the room she sat, my soon-to-be ex-wife, Sarah. She looked calm, almost serene, like a statue of innocence. Just moments ago, she had finished testifying, her voice clear and steady as she painted a picture of herself as a victim, a devoted wife and mother, struggling financially because of my supposed neglect. She had just sworn, under oath, that she had never used our joint savings account for anything frivolous, that every penny had gone towards household necessities and our kids. A bold-faced lie. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a man who looked like he belonged on a golf course, but moved like a predator, stood up. He walked towards the judge, a stack of papers in his hand. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment we had planned for, the moment I had dreaded and longed for all at once. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison's voice was deep, cutting through the silence. My client, Mr. Miller, would like to present evidence that directly contradicts the statements just made by Mrs. Miller regarding her financial expenditures. Sarah's head snapped towards him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It wasn't panic yet, not quite. More like a brief moment of confusion. She probably thought he was talking about some vague bank statements, easily spun or explained away. She had always been good at spinning things. For years I'd watched her, listened to her, and slowly, painfully, learned to see through the beautiful facade. The Sarah sitting across from me now was a stranger, a cruel imitation of the woman I had married 15 years ago. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Davies, nodded curtly. Proceed, Mr. Harrison. He turned back to his table. That's when I saw it. Not just a stack of papers. On top of the stack, carefully placed, were physical objects. Small, rectangular, colorful. They were receipts, not just printouts from a bank, but actual tangible receipts. From high-end boutiques, from luxury travel agencies, from a jewelry store I had never even known existed. My lawyer, in his meticulous, almost obsessive way, had gone above and beyond. He had literally brought receipts. Each one a tiny dagger poised to pierce the carefully constructed image of my wife. A gasp rippled through the gallery. It wasn't a huge courtroom, but word had gotten around that this divorce was getting nasty, especially concerning the financial split. My parents were there, looking pale and worried. Sarah's sister, a perpetually disapproving presence, was there too, her jaw now hanging slightly open. Sarah herself, who had been watching Mr. Harrison with a faint smirk, now froze, her eyes fixated on the pile of colored slips. Her face, which moments ago had been so calm, drained of all color. It was like watching a perfectly made-up mask crumble. The air went from thick to absolutely suffocating. Mr. Harrison picked up the first receipt. He held it up for the judge to see, then handed a copy to Sarah's lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Evans, who fumbled with, "This, Your Honor, is a receipt from Celestial Gems, dated 6 months ago. It's for a diamond pendant, priced at $14,000, paid for using funds from the joint savings account." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. $14,000. Sarah had claimed she hadn't bought anything frivolous. She had cried about not having enough money for school supplies for our kids, about needing more child support. And here it was, a sparkling cold piece of paper, screaming the truth. Sarah's face was a masterpiece of disbelief and dawning horror. She shook her head, a desperate, jerky movement. "That's not mine. I never bought that," she blurted out, her voice cracking, completely different from the calm tone she'd used moments before. Judge Davies raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Miller, you are under oath. You just testified that you made no frivolous purchases. Mr. Harrison didn't miss a beat. He picked up another receipt. And this, Your Honor, from Vogue Couture, a women's clothing store, for over $3,000. Date, 2 months ago. Again from the joint savings. Continued, one after another. Each receipt, a new revelation. Each one hammering home the extent of her deception. A weekend trip to a spa resort for over $5,000. 2 months before she told me she couldn't afford to take the kids to the local swimming pool. A designer handbag for $2,000. Bought while she was complaining about needing new tires for her car. The judge was taking notes, her expression growing colder with each piece of evidence. Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Evans, looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. He whispered frantically to Sarah, who was now openly trembling. Her composure completely shattered. The mask was off, and what lay beneath was raw, ugly truth. It was a heartbreaking sight, not because I felt sorry for her, but because it confirmed everything I had feared. That the woman I married, the woman I had built a life with, was capable of such elaborate, calculated deceit. And that realization hurt more than any lie. 2 years ago, our life had seemed perfectly normal from the outside. We had a nice house, 2 beautiful kids, stable jobs. I worked as an engineer, steady income. Sarah worked part-time as a graphic designer, mostly from home. Or so I thought. We had met in college, young and full of dreams. We built a life brick by brick, shared laughter, shared struggles. I honestly thought we were a team. But, looking back now, the cracks had been there for a while, subtle at first, then growing wider. Sarah had always been a little more focused on appearances, on having the right things, but I put it down to ambition. She always wanted a bit more, the nicer car, the bigger house. I tried to provide to make her happy. The shift started subtly. She became more secretive with her phone, always taking calls in another room, or keeping it face down. She started going out more girls' nights that lasted longer and longer, sometimes stretching into the early hours. When I asked, she'd get defensive, say I was being controlling, accuse me of not trusting her, and I, being the trusting fool I was, would back down. I always hated conflict. I wanted to believe her. My job was demanding, I was often tired. I told myself it was just a phase, that the stresses of life and kids were getting to her. Then came the money issues. Our joint account, which I managed for most of our marriage, started to look thinner than usual. When I asked her about specific large withdrawals, she'd have an answer ready. Oh, that was for the kids' new school uniforms, remember? Or, I had to get the car repaired, it was urgent. Or, I bought groceries in bulk, saved us money in the long run. Her explanations always sounded plausible enough, especially since I didn't meticulously track every single dollar. I trusted her. That was my biggest mistake. The real red flag came when I suggested we look into buying a bigger house. We needed more space for the kids as they grew. Sarah immediately shut down the idea. She said we couldn't afford it, that we were barely making ends meet, despite our combined income being quite comfortable. It didn't make sense. I started looking at our bank statements more closely. That's when I saw it. The massive expenditures listed as inzig or personal shopping. They weren't just big, they were ridiculously frequent. And they always happened when I was away on a business trip, or working late. I confronted her gently at first. I showed her a printout. Sarah, what are these charges? This is thousands of dollars in a single month. She exploded, not with explanation, but with rage. She accused me of spying on her, of being cheap, of not appreciating how hard she worked for our family. She twisted everything around, making me feel guilty for even asking. I was so taken aback by her anger, by her complete refusal to acknowledge the facts, that I retreated. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It wasn't just doubt. It was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Something was seriously wrong. I started to wonder what else she was lying about. The girls' nights, the secretive phone calls. It all started to click into place. A horrifying puzzle revealing itself piece by piece. Truth was, our marriage wasn't just decaying. It had been rotten from the inside for a long, long time. And I had been too blind or too unwilling to see it. The decision to file for divorce was the hardest I'd ever made. It felt like tearing my own heart out. I thought about the kids, about the life we had built. But the trust was gone, complete. Constant suspicion, the lies, the financial drains had poisoned everything. I couldn't live like that anymore, constantly feeling like I was being played for a fool. When I finally told Sarah I wanted a divorce, her reaction was surprisingly calm at first. Too calm. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded slowly. Then her eyes narrowed. "Fine," she said, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "But you'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret this." And she did. The moment the papers were served, her calm facade shattered, replaced by a vicious determination. Her demands were exorbitant. She wanted the house, full custody of the kids with minimal visitation for me, and an astronomical amount of spousal and child support. She claimed she couldn't work full-time because of the kids, despite having a perfectly good part-time job and a flexible schedule. She painted herself as the financially vulnerable one, the stay-at-home parent who had sacrificed her career for the family, when in reality, she'd always had a career, albeit a part-time one she enjoyed. That's when I knew I needed serious help. I couldn't navigate this alone. My brother recommended Mr. Harrison, a family lawyer known for his no-nonsense approach and his thoroughness. I remember our first meeting. I laid it all out for him, the disappearing money, the suspicious behavior, my fears. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned forward. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "divorce court is not always about who is right or wrong morally speaking. It's about facts, evidence. Your wife is going to try to paint you as the villain and herself as the victim. We need to be prepared to counter that with irrefutable proof." He explained the discovery process, how they would request financial records, communications, everything. But he also gave me a crucial piece of advice. The system relies on what people present. If she's been hiding things, if she's been spending money she claims she hasn't, we need to find the specific transactions. And sometimes, he leaned in conspiratorially, the best evidence isn't just a line on a bank statement. It's the physical proof, the actual receipt, the confirmation email, the shipping notice. Anything that ties her directly to those expenditures. Told me to think of anything, any detail, any past conversation that might lead to something. He asked me about her habits, her friends, her favorite places to shop. He even suggested checking her online order history, if I had any access. It felt invasive, like spying on my own wife, even if she was soon to be my ex-wife. But I knew he was right. If I didn't fight back with facts, I would lose everything. And, more importantly, I would let her continue to live a lie, potentially hurting our children in the process. The hunt for truth had begun, and I had no idea just how much I was about to uncover. The hunt for truth became an obsession, a grim scavenger hunt through the ruins of my marriage. Mr. Harrison had planted the seed, and now it was growing into a thorny bush of suspicion and determination. I felt like a detective in my own life, trying to piece together a crime I had been a victim of. It was emotionally exhausting. Every evening after work, instead of relaxing, I would pore over old bank statements, credit card bills, and shared email accounts. I looked for patterns, for anomalies. Sarah had been clever, scattering her bigger purchases among regular household expenses, hoping they'd blend in. But with Mr. Harrison's guidance, I started seeing them. He had advised me to think outside the box. Not just financial records, but anything that could prove her movements, her activities, and her spending habits. He asked about online shopping. Did we share Amazon accounts? Did she have loyalty cards for certain stores? He even suggested looking through old photo albums, checking the backgrounds for clues. It felt dirty, invasive, like I was betraying a trust that was already shattered. But then I'd remember her lies in court, her cold demands, and the fire in my belly would reignite. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from something seemingly innocent: our shared email account for bills and subscriptions. Sarah had been careless. When she ordered things online, sometimes the shipping confirmations, the e-receipts, or the tracking numbers would end up in that shared inbox. She must have deleted them most of the time, but some slipped through the cracks. There was an email from a high-end travel agency for a non-refundable spa retreat pack. The dates coincided exactly with the girls' weekend. She told me it was a camping trip with friends. The cost was astronomical for a camping trip. And then tucked away in the attachments was a PDF receipt detailing the specific treatments and luxury suite she had booked. That was the first literal receipt I found digitally. Next, I remembered how Sarah used to save physical receipts for tax purposes, just throwing them into a random drawer in our home office. I had always assumed they were for legitimate business expenses for her freelance work. Now, with a growing sense of dread, I started sifting through them. Most were mundane: groceries, gas, kids' clothes. But then I struck gold. There were small fancy envelopes, usually for jewelry stores or high-end boutiques. Inside were the printed receipts. One was for that diamond pendant Mr. Harrison showed in court. Another was for a designer watch. Another for an expensive piece of art. Each one funded by our joint account. Funds she had claimed were for our family's basic needs. It was infuriating. I also looked at her car's mileage, cross-referencing it with her supposed whereabouts. She often claimed to be at a friend's house nearby, but the mileage logs from oil changes showed much longer distances. Travel, combined with specific credit card transactions from cities hours away. It started to paint a picture of a life she was leading completely separate from mine. My mind raced with possibilities. Was there another person involved? Was it just lavish spending? The thought of an affair was agonizing, but the financial deception was undeniably real, concrete. I meticulously photographed every physical receipt, organized every digital one, and created a detailed spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, vendors, and the specific lie it contradicted. It was a painstaking process, often taking me late into the night. My emotions swung wildly between cold fury and profound sadness. This was the woman I had promised to spend my life with, the mother of my children. And she had been systematically deceiving me, siphoning off our shared future for her own secret indulgences. Pain of betrayal was sharp, a constant ache in my chest. But with each piece of evidence I found, the knot of helplessness began to loosen, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for my kids, to ensure they had a stable future, and to show them indirectly that honesty eventually prevails. I was arming Mr. Harrison with every single weapon he would need. And I knew, deep down, that the truth, no matter how ugly, was finally ready to be revealed. The day of the hearing was fast approaching, and I was ready. The day of the hearing dawned cold and gray, a perfect reflection of the knot of dread and anticipation in my stomach. I woke up early, the events of the day already playing out in my mind. I reviewed the folders of evidence one last time, the physical receipts tucked safely inside a large manila envelope. Each one represented hours of painstaking investigation and years of Sarah's lies. I dressed carefully, a dark suit that felt more like armor than clothing. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had told me to look calm, collected, and ready. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air was already buzzing with low murmurs. You'd travels fast in these legal circles, and everyone knew this was going to be a contentious hearing. My parents were there, giving me a silent, reassuring squeeze of the arm. Presence was a comfort, a reminder of the unwavering support I still had. Then Sarah walked in. She was wearing a perfectly tailored navy dress, her hair impeccably styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like a television star, poised and elegant. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile to her lawyer, Mr. Evans, who looked considerably less confident than she did. When her eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something, a fleeting moment of cold triumph, as if she already knew she had won. Her demeanor was pure confidence bordering on smugness. It was clear she believed her performance the other day, portraying herself as the struggling victim, had been utterly convincing. Courtroom filled up, mostly with legal professionals, but also some curious observers. Judge Davies entered, and everyone rose. The proceedings began. Sarah was called to the stand again, to continue her testimony from the previous day. She settled into the witness chair, crossing her legs elegantly, and began to speak. Her voice was soft, almost angelic, as she reiterated her financial struggles, her dedication to the children, and her supposed sacrifices for our family. She talked about how she had put her career on hold, how she had always been frugal, always prioritizing the family's needs over her own. She even teared up a little when she spoke about our shared future and how I had destroyed it by filing for divorce. It was a masterful performance, designed to pull at the judge's heartstrings and paint me as the callous one. Then came the lie, the big one. I have never, not once, used our joint savings account for anything other than essential household expenses or our children's direct needs. I have always been careful with our money, especially given our circumstances. She looked directly at Judge Davies as she said it, her eyes wide and earnest, as if daring anyone to question her integrity. My stomach churned. This was it, the direct contradiction we needed. Mr. Harrison rose for cross-examination. He walked slowly towards the witness stand, his presence radiating a quiet authority. He started calmly, asking a few general questions about her income, her schedule. Sarah answered smoothly, maintaining her persona. Then Mr. Harrison's voice changed, becoming sharper, more focused. Mrs. Miller, you just testified that you never used the joint savings account for anything other than essentials. Is that correct? Sarah nodded, a confident smile playing on her lips. Yes, absolutely correct. And you swore under oath to tell the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Of course, she said, almost patronizingly. Mr. Harrison paused. He walked back to our table and picked up the thick manila envelope. The sight of it sent a ripple through the courtroom. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear now replacing her smugness. She knew what was coming. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Harrison said, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. Would you consider a $14,000 diamond pendant an essential household expense? He held up the first receipt, the bright colors of the jeweler's logo stark against the white paper. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The trap had been sprung. And Sarah, for the first time, looked truly trapped. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's question was deafening, broken only by the rustle of papers as he held up the first receipt. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the receipt, then at Mr. Harrison, then desperately at her own lawyer, Mr. Evans, who suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere but that courtroom. He began to stammer. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. This is irrelevant." Judge Davies held up a hand, silencing him. Her gaze was fixed on Sarah, unblinking. "Mrs. Miller, do you recognize this receipt?" Sarah shook her head wildly. "No, that's not mine. I've never seen that store." Her voice was higher pitched now, laced with panic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. Mr. Harrison, unperturbed, walked closer to the witness stand. "Really, Mrs. Miller? Because this receipt bears the last 4 digits of your social security number, which you used for loyalty program points. It also has your name printed on it, Sarah Miller. And the purchase date, 6 months ago, coincides with a withdrawal of $14,000 from the joint savings account, listed as miscellaneous household expenses." He presented a blown-up copy of the bank statement alongside the receipt. The evidence was irrefutable. He didn't stop there. He laid out the receipts one by one, each one a hammer blow. "And this, Mrs. Miller, from Vogue Couture, a boutique you claimed you never shopped at. A dress, a jacket, and shoes, totaling $3,100, paid with the joint credit card. Your signature is on the receipt." He gestured to a tiny, barely legible signature at the bottom, which was clearly hers. Sarah was shaking now, visibly. Her previous composure had completely evaporated. She was twisting her hands, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "These are fake. He's trying to frame me," she shrieked, pointing at me. "He's always been jealous of my success, my independence." Judge Davies slammed her gavel. "Order, Mrs. Miller. I remind you that you are under oath. Accusations against opposing counsel are inappropriate and unprofessional. Answer the questions." Mr. Harrison moved on, methodical and relentless. "And this, Mrs. Miller, a receipt from Serene Escape Spa and Resort for a 5-day luxury retreat, including private massages and champagne service. Total, $5,700. Paid by transfer from the joint savings account. This trip, Mrs. Miller, was taken during the week you told your husband you were at a camping trip with friends in the mountains, correct?" He laid down the email confirmation for the spa, complete with her name and the specific dates. Sarah looked at it, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't remember. You don't remember spending nearly $6,000 on a spa trip while your husband believed you were roughing it in a tent?" Mr. Harrison's voice was laced with disbelief. He then presented a series of smaller but still significant receipts. $2,000 handbag, $1,000 pair of shoes, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never even heard of. Each time he paired the physical receipt with the corresponding bank statement entry. The pattern was undeniable. A secret life funded by deception. The judge's face was grim. She was meticulously noting down every item, every amount, every day. Mr. Evans, Sarah's lawyer, finally found his voice, but it was weak. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. We were not provided with these specific documents." "Mr. Evans," Judge Davies said, her voice sharp as ice, "financial discovery was completed weeks ago. These are original receipts from purchases made from accounts under your client's control. Your client has also just perjured herself multiple times. We will address that in due course. For now, Mr. Harrison, please continue with your cross-examination." Mr. Harrison looked at Sarah, who was now weeping, her face streaked with tears and smeared makeup. The elegant facade was completely gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic figure. "No further questions, Your Honor," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He had done his job. He had revealed the truth, piece by painstaking piece, through the undeniable power of physical literal receipts. The room buzzed with shocked whispers. My own emotions were a whirlwind, not triumph, but a profound, aching sadness. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, had chosen this path. And now, the painful, undeniable truth was laid bare for all to see. The gavel came down with a decisive thud, signaling a recess. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a thick, heavy blanket smothering everyone. Sarah, still sobbing, was practically dragged away by her lawyer, Mr. Evans, who looked utterly defeated. She didn't even glance my way. I sat there numb, watching the chaos unfold. My parents came over, my mother putting a comforting hand on my arm. "You did the right thing," she whispered, her voice full of a mixture of relief and sorrow. For me, there was no feeling of triumph, no surge of victorious adrenaline. Just a profound exhaustion, a deep sadness that settled heavy in my bones. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash that you knew was coming, but couldn't prevent. Truth was out, undeniable, but the cost was immeasurable. The woman I had loved and trusted was a stranger, exposed as a calculating liar. The foundation of our shared life, already crumbling, had now spectacularly collapsed. During the recess, Mr. Harrison took me aside. "That went exactly as planned," he said, his voice quiet, almost gentle. "Her credibility is completely shot. The judge saw it, everyone saw it. This fundamentally changes everything in terms of asset division and likely custody." He was right. Perjury was a serious offense in court. It meant Sarah's testimony couldn't be trusted on any. Her entire case, built on her victim narrative, had just imploded. Later that day, after the recess, the judge made it clear where she stood. Judge Davies, visibly displeased by Sarah's blatant dishonesty, announced that she would be considering the perjured testimony when making her final ruling. She also indicated that she would be reviewing all financial claims made by Sarah with extreme scrutiny. Mr. Evans, Sarah's lawyer, tried to argue for a postponement, claiming he needed more time to review new evidence, but the judge shut him down. The evidence wasn't new. It was simply now undeniable. The legal implications were clear. Custody arrangements would likely favor me, given Sarah's demonstrated lack of trustworthiness and the potential for a financially irresponsible environment. The financial settlement would lean heavily in my favor as well, with the court likely to account for the funds Sarah had secretly squandered. There was even talk of potential criminal charges for perjury, though Mr. Harrison said it was rare for judges to pursue that, unless the perjury was particularly egregious or impacted a criminal case. Still, the possibility hung in the air. Leaving the courthouse that day, the cold gray sky seemed to mirror my internal landscape. The immediate relief of having the truth revealed was there, yes, but it was overshadowed by the bitter taste of betrayal. My marriage was over, not just legally but emotionally, irrevocably. The image of Sarah, weeping and exposed on the witness stand, was burned into my mind. It wasn't the picture of a villain, but of a deeply troubled person who had lost her way. And that was perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all. She had chosen lies over honesty, luxury over integrity, and in doing so had destroyed not just our marriage, but also her own credibility and dignity. I had won the battle in court, but it felt like a hollow victory, a painful confirmation of a reality I had long resisted. The journey towards healing, I knew, would be a long and arduous one. But at least now, I could start walking it on a path illuminated by the harsh, unyielding light of truth. The days and weeks following the court hearing were a blur of legal paperwork and emotional processing. The immediate aftermath was messy, as expected. Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Evans, tried to salvage what he could, but it was a losing battle. The judge's stance was firm. Sarah's credibility was shattered. She was found in contempt of court for her deceptive testimony. While no criminal perjury charges were immediately filed, the judge made it clear that any further deception would lead to severe consequences. The impact on the divorce proceedings was immediate and decisive. The financial claims Sarah had made were largely dismissed. The judge ordered a thorough forensic audit of all our shared accounts, which further confirmed the extensive, undisclosed spending I had uncovered. As a result, the asset division heavily favored me, taking into account the funds Sarah had squandered. The house which she had fought so hard for was awarded to me, along with a significant portion of our joint savings to compensate for her illicit expenditures. She was left with what she had earned herself, and a very modest settlement. A far cry from the lavish lifestyle she had been secretly building. The most sensitive issue, our children, was handled with care by the judge. Given Sarah's demonstrated dishonesty and financial irresponsibility, I was granted primary physical custody. Sarah was given generous visitation rights, emphasizing the importance of both parents in the children's lives, but with certain stipulations about financial transparency and ensuring a stable environment during her visitation period. It was a huge relief, knowing my kids would be safe and stable with me. It broke my heart that it came to this, but I knew it was the right decision for their well-being. Sarah reacted with a mix of fury and despair. She screamed at Mr. Evans. She tried to appeal, but the evidence was simply too strong. The literal receipts, paired with her own perjured testimony, sealed her fate. She lost not just the material things she craved, but also, far more importantly, the trust of the court, and by extension, the ability to manipulate the system. For me, the victory felt bittersweet. There was relief, certainly. A heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer had to constantly question, to constantly fear being deceived. But beneath the relief was a profound sense of loss. The dream of a happy family, the years of shared history, had been irrevocably stained by betrayal. It wasn't just Sarah's secret spending. It was the years of lies, the emotional manipulation, the sheer audacity of her deceit. That hurt more than any financial loss. I began the slow process of picking up the pieces of my life. The house felt strangely quiet without Sarah's presence, though the constant underlying tension she created was gone. My kids were resilient, but confused. I tried my best to explain the situation in an age-appropriate way, emphasizing that sometimes adults make bad choices, but that both their parents still love them. It was a delicate dance, protecting them while also being truthful. The experience had changed me. I was more cautious now, more aware of subtle signs of deception. But I also emerged stronger, more self-reliant. I had faced the worst, endured the pain of betrayal, and emerged with my integrity intact. The truth in the end had set me free, even if it had left some deep, raw scars. I was learning to breathe again, to look towards a future that, while different from what I had imagined, was at least honest. Court battle was over, but the personal journey of healing and rebuilding had just begun. Months turned into a year, then two. The dust from the divorce slowly settled, leaving behind a new landscape. My life, once defined by the tumultuous marriage and the painful divorce, began to take on a new shape. The kids adjusted remarkably well. They had a stable home with me, a routine, and an environment free from the constant undercurrent of tension that had plagued our house for years. Sarah continued to have her visitations, and while our interactions were strained and polite, the raw anger and hurt began to subside, replaced by a weary acceptance. She had faced some minor consequences for her perjury, a fine and a public record of contempt, which made it harder for her to get certain types of freelance work. Her financial situation was a struggle, as she no longer had access to my income or the joint accounts she had so carelessly depleted. It wasn't a satisfying feeling to see her struggle, just a quiet confirmation that actions have consequences. I focused on work, on my kids, and on rediscovering myself. I started going to the gym, picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, and spent more time with friends and family who had supported me through the darkest period. The house, which had once felt like a cage, now felt like a sanctuary. I renovated parts of it, making it truly my own, a place where peace could finally reside. Constant suspicion I once felt began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. I learned to trust my instincts again, but with a newfound wisdom. If something felt off, I now knew to pay attention, to seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. The emotional scars were still there, of course. The memory of her lies, of the betrayal, would sometimes surface, a phantom ache in my chest. It taught me invaluable lessons about trust, about the true nature of integrity. It taught me that sometimes the person you think you know best can be the one who surprises you most painfully. But it also showed me my own resilience, my capacity to fight for what was right, and my unwavering commitment to my children's well-being. I started dating again, tentatively at first. It was strange, navigating the world of relationships with the weight of my past. I was open about my divorce, about what happened, because I believed in honesty from the start. It was a filter, in a way. Anyone who couldn't handle the truth of my story, or who judged me for it, wasn't someone I needed in my life. I learned to look for kindness, for genuine empathy, for a person whose actions matched their words. One day, I found myself looking at an old photograph of Sarah and me, taken early in our marriage. We were smiling, young and full of hope. For a moment, a wave of nostalgia, then sadness washed over me. But it wasn't the bitter, resentful sadness of the past. It was a quieter, more reflective sorrow for what could have been, for the dreams that had died. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had faced the fire, and I had survived. The receipts in court had done more than just win me a legal battle. They had provided me with the tangible proof I needed to process the reality of the situation, to truly understand what had happened, and to finally begin to heal. My life was not perfect, but it was mine, built on a foundation of truth, and that felt like a new beginning. The final receipt, I realized much later, wasn't a physical document at all. It was the quiet, undeniable truth that settled within me, deep in my bones, long after the courtrooms and lawyers and arguments faded into memory. It was the understanding that, while external evidence can expose lies, true healing comes from within. It came from accepting what happened, forgiving myself for not seeing it sooner, and finding a way to move forward with integrity. My life continued to unfold. The children grew, thriving in the stability I provide. They eventually understood more about the divorce, not through bitter accusations, but through observing the stark contrast between two different ways of living. One built on honesty, the other on artifice. They learned that actions have consequences, that truth always finds a way to surface, and that character matters. That in itself was a profound receipt for me. The evidence that I had shielded them, guided them, and given them a foundation based on reality, not deception. I never became cynical about people, though I became wiser. I learned to observe, to listen to what people did, not just what they said. The sting of Sarah's betrayal, while still a part of my history, no longer defined my present or future. It became a lesson, a painful but ultimately transformative one. The feeling of being played, of being a fool, slowly diminished, replaced by the quiet confidence of a survivor. I had been knocked down, but I had gotten back up, armed with truth, and rebuilt my life on stronger ground. Sometimes, I'd see Sarah from a distance, during school events or quick exchanges with the kids. She seemed perpetually burdened, her eyes still holding a hint of that desperate cornered look. She never found the lavish lifestyle she had chased so reckless. Life had a way of balancing the scales, of delivering its own receipts, not always in a courtroom, but in the slow, grinding reality of consequences. It wasn't about schadenfreude. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of a universal principle. You reap what you sow. The last receipt for me was the realization of my own self-worth. For years I had allowed Sarah's manipulations to chip away at my confidence, to make me doubt my own perceptions. Court case, with its undeniable proof, had shattered that illusion. It showed me that my instincts had been right all along, that my quiet persistence in seeking the truth was justified. It was the receipt for my own resilience, for standing up for myself and for my children, even when it was agonizingly painful. Life isn't a fairy tale. There wasn't a sudden magical happy ending where all pain vanished. But there was peace. There was quiet joy in simple things. Laughter with my kids. A genuine connection with new friends. The satisfaction of a job well done. The brokenness of the past became a part of my story, not its end. The literal receipts in court had been a vital tool in a specific battle. But the ultimate, most profound receipt was the one for my own journey of healing, growth, and finding an honest path forward, one step at a time. Truth had set me free, not just from a bad marriage, but from the shadow of deception itself.